Prime Minister Narendra Modi is in Kazan, Russia to attend the BRICS Summit hosted by Russian President Vladimir Putin. The summit comes amid the ongoing Russia-Ukraine war, the Israel-Hamas-Hezbollah war and the soured India-Canada diplomatic relations. The current geopolitical developments now give us an opportunity to revisit history and perhaps reopen a conversation about the way forward. While India and Russia have been considered all-weather allies, the post-Cold War world gave rise to a perception within geopolitical and diplomatic circles that the strengthening of relations between Russia and China as natural geographic partners pushed India more towards the United States of America. The logic behind this perception was pretty clear that as democratic nations, India being the largest democracy and the U.S. claiming to be the torchbearer of a free rules-based world, India and America share common values underscored by common principles of democracy. It is said that Russia and China are closer than ever before, and therefore having a solid ally in America is crucial for an upcoming global economy like India. But certain perceptions require to be revisited. The BRICS Summit in Russia, where India and Russia have held a bilateral meeting, is taking place amidst crucial global developments. Russia has been at war with Ukraine for the larger part of 2 years now. India, meanwhile, has been pulled up before the rest of the world by Canada and its ally, the United States of America. Canada has made serious allegations against Indian diplomats, calling them hitmen and accusing them of carrying out extrajudicial killings on its soil. While Canada has been allowing anti-India separatists and secessionists to roam free, the United States of America has further bolstered Canada's accusations by blaming Indian officials in a foiled assassination attempt against a man who routinely threatens to blow up Indian planes and the Indian Parliament. If the roles were reversed, viewers, and New Delhi allowed Canadian separatists to hold a free Quebec referendum on our soil, the same America would leave no stone unturned to paint India as a failed, unlawful democracy. There is no question on how the West would react if the roles were reversed. But history has many lessons to teach. Let's go back quickly to the Bangladesh Liberation War when the United States of America dispatched a naval fleet to the Bay of Bengal in support of our rogue neighbor Pakistan. Instead of using the force of the US to assist in the liberation of Bangladesh from the brutal rape and murder led by General Yahya Khan, Nixon's administration wanted to thwart a young India's efforts by sending its own naval fleet to the Bay of Bengal and further urging China to launch a military campaign to isolate India. It was the Soviet Union which responded to India's call for help and deployed a nuclear-armed flotilla which ultimately countered the American and British naval presence in the Bay of Bengal. Now, some might argue that this was before the end of the Cold War, and as I've explained, perceptions since have changed. But I would then beg you to look at the actions of United States of America in the recent past. Just 2 years back, the US defended a $450 million fighter jet deal to Pakistan, the infamous F-16s. Antony Blinken, US Secretary of State, said, and I'm quoting here, "These are not new planes, new systems or new weapons. It's sustaining what they have. Pakistan's program bolsters its capability to deal with terrorist threats emanating from Pakistan or from the region. It is in no one's interest that those threats be able to go forward with impunity." Pakistan has never used a single penny of American dollars or other aid to combat terrorism. The same America, which started several wars on terrorism, has no shame in defending its deals with Pakistan and its continued support to Pakistan over the years, despite India giving hundreds and thousands of pages worth of documents which detail the terrorism that is harbored by Pakistan. So in the current geopolitical developments then, we are forced to ask a pertinent question. who really today or historically has been a better friend to India? I take this conversation forward. I have with me Gleb Buratov with us on the broadcast, expert from Russia. We have Gautam Mukherjee, senior journalist with us, and Ninat Seth, foreign affairs expert, also with us on the broadcast. Let me begin this conversation with Ninat Seth. Ninat Seth, I've just tried to give very quickly a historical perspective, but these are not just the two examples that come to mind when one has to really today, like I said, revisit this perception that has been created that simply because India is now diversifying its defense imports, that we have somewhere moved away from a dependence on Russia and we're exploring other options like France and the United States, that somehow US is a better friend of India than Russia. Your thoughts?
Very simple, you are right, but there are no friends in international relations. We have to understand that India is in the middle of a world which was a world, ironically, 100 years ago, just before the First World War, where tectonic shifts are happening. So what India is doing is, especially in the context of BRICS, is a very complex counter maneuver of balancing international relations and interests. There are three things here which are very interesting. And it's not, restricted only to BRICS. We have, for example, people forget that, India owns privately the ports of Haifa as well as the port of Chabahar. Similarly, India has interests with Ukraine and Russia. India is welcoming, for example, the joining of Azerbaijan in BRICS, although we support Armenia in the war. So what here is unfolding is a very complex geopolitical, situation where India is doing something which is, if you go for an IPO, it is an IPO, it's a geopolitical IPO which has to be underwritten. Now, what is it underwritten by? It's underwritten by a $4 trillion economy growing nominally at 7%. So, India is the option. Now, there are three things here. The first is that, India has, I think, realized a little late that the Anglo-Saxon world wants to use it as a tool vis-a-vis China, and having realized that, it is counterposing its situation. Second, the recent China breakthrough on the border, the details have to be waited. Ironically, we will need much more force up in the mountains in the cold winter because we have to be watchful. We don't know how it will play out. The fact is that it does keep the temperature down. It does send a signal to the United States. There's a huge thing happening in November 4th. The United States, who lost India, could be the next question in America.
Okay. Gautam Mukherjee, same question to you. I want to understand from your perspective. As Ninat Seth pointed out, yes, very well, there are no friends, perhaps one can take that line in international relations. But given the current circumstances and the way we've seen the United States of America react against India, do we now need to have a genuine revisit of this growing perception that was there, that the United States of America will solidly stand behind India as compared to Russia?
Well, I think the binary is over. The binary is over for a number of reasons. Russia isn't, it's still a military power of great import, but as an economy, it is just about $1.5 trillion. It's got very little going. It's a large country, but it's got oil, it's got armaments. The USSR is dead, and so there is really no balance of power that we could use as we did in the old days by leaning towards the USSR in order to balance the West that was very much on the side of Pakistan, and then when they opened up China, on the side of China from the 70s onwards. So today we are adopting our policy in a way that dependence on all is trying to be reduced. Now, from 50+% in fact, even more given the years, but from 50+% of defense dependence on Russia, it is now down to about 36%. We have increased our defense cooperation with America to about 20%. We also have defense cooperation with France at about 13%, and we are doing all we can to promote Atmanirbhar. Now, this process must continue. There's Israel as well, from where we also get certain defense equipment and cooperation in agriculture and so on. So today, it isn't a matter of leaning one way or the other. It's a matter of leaning wherever the deal is appropriate and in terms of Indian interests. It isn't only the West that wants to use us against China. We need to be very careful. China is the second largest economy. It is very keen on dominating Asia, certainly, and the world if it can. And we are in the way as far as China is concerned. Now that its economy is imploding within, it is softening its stance, perhaps, if we go by the latest developments on the border, the LAC. However, we have to be wary because the size differentials are very vast. Here is a 15 to 18 trillion dollar economy. We are a $4 trillion economy. Even when we go to third largest in the world, it's going to take us a while before we are actually at 10 plus. So China is something that we have to be wary of. China is something that we have to defend against, particularly with its cat's paw, Pakistan also acting against us, and the Chinese strategy of trying to encircle India by mucking into all the countries in the littoral, that's Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Nepal, Bhutan, practically all around. It isn't obvious about it, but given the opportunity, it will do us down. And the question of a reordering of the world, in terms of our relationship with, for example, Iran, Russia, and so on, that is some distance away. It is very similar to trying to replace the dollar as the global currency of trade. It's some distance away, and it involves, basically China not seeing India as an adversary. I don't think that time has come as yet. So we will work with the West. We will work with others. We will work with Taiwan, which China may not like, but we are going to plow our own furrow and see how it helps us maintain our security and advance our economy.
Okay.
Devika.
I want to bring Gleb Borisov into the conversation as well. Gleb, I want to understand from your perspective, how do the current geopolitical developments across the world really provide an impetus or a push to both India and Russia to perhaps once again revisit their relation?
Well, can you hear me?
Yes,
all good?
yes, we can.
Yes, hello. Yes, as a representative of the, of a commercial industry, as a businessman, I can say that geopolitics is following its own way, whereas business is following its own way. And unfortunately, especially recently, the geopolitics has been going against private, not just SME, but even large businesses, So there's been quite a disconnect between the actions of the individual governments, global governments, against the interests of, of the very people they're supposed to look after and protect, i.e. the businesses of their countries. So one thing from a geopolitical perspective, and this is my personal opinion, I mean, every country should look after their own interests, okay? Just like India is doing. I think India in that sense is doing great because it's taking the best it can take from different parts of the world, okay? Without leaning towards one, single political bloc. Because as we've seen in the last 15 years, once you start leaning towards a single political bloc, this is a path to disaster, because this will effectively destroy your country, politically, economically, even physically. We've seen all those wars happening in the world. So the best thing a country can do, in my mind, right now, is to look after its own interests, look after its own people, look after the benefit of its companies, okay? Because ultimately it's the companies which are driving the economy and driving the welfare of its people, okay? So that's the view that I have. In terms of the competition between India, China, the West, Russia, one must understand that in a globalized world, and we are in a globalized world, however anyone might dispute that, each country, each region brings in a valuable part to the global supply chain, knowledge-based chain. Okay, so instead of positioning yourself for hard competition, I think one should look at the stronger points, at the core competencies that the country or the specific region has. Okay, understand how we could use these competencies in order to, position itself in a favorable way, in the global environment. But at the same time, the core competencies of one region or one country, they're never enough to actually be a competitive player. So you always need certain technology, certain expertise, certain components or certain raw materials, in order to be at the forefront. So basically, what I'm trying to say is that the geopolitics of today are unfortunately not favoring the majority of the businesses. They're definitely favoring some, but this is a very small percentage. If you look specifically at the Canada-India case, where the trade has really started to develop relatively recently. Okay, Canada mainly exporting agricultural products and raw materials to India, and India exporting value-added goods. But the amount of this, the value of this trade has really been quite little. We're talking about five billion going from being exported from Canada, 8 billion exported from India to Canada. If you compare it to a Canadian relationship with China, it's like 5-6 times less. So rather than creating those artificial political issues, I'd really encourage everyone, both politicians on both fronts, to actually focus on real thing. Okay, yes. To leave the political differences aside and actually focus on developing those bilateral links.
Okay, all right.
Because India is going to be second, if not the first largest economy in the world very soon.
Yes.
Okay, and Canada should really think twice before giving away such a major resource.
Right, okay? Absolutely.
Which will effectively help develop the Canadian economy as well. So yeah, this is my humble personal view.
Okay, Gleb, thank you so much for joining us. Ninad Seth, I want to bring you back in the conversation. We were, of course, discussing a little bit earlier as far as the binaries are concerned. Gautam Mukherjee pointed out that the binaries no longer exist and it pretty much is to each country its own as far as one is looking after its own interests. That's the point of view that's put forward. But coming back to the BRICS conversation, how does BRICS then deal with some of the contradictions that continue to be pointed out by geopolitical experts? The fact that India and China are together, or the fact that the BRICS nations have brought in several new members, which also includes a country like Iran?
I think that is an excellent question. You see, BRICS is almost like, how do I say it? In boxing, you need a good neck. You need reach, you need to punch, but you need a good neck. BRICS is a good neck. India can absorb their contradictions, but there are two contradictions which India is finding very difficult to absorb. And we have to keep this in mind. We have to be realistic, One of the greatest lessons in the world is that you can fool everybody, you must not fool yourself. And when I say that, I mean is that India has a $70 billion trade deficit with China, but people do not talk about the trade deficit with Russia. We have, despite cheap oil, a $40 billion trade deficit with Russia last year. So, there are contradictions which are not obvious in the BRICS. There are geopolitical contradictions, there are economic contradictions, but there is also a very, very, very important force of people and economies and countries standing up against the Anglo-Saxon world. So, when you have a fluid geopolitical situation, it is almost like physics. You don't know how the atoms will add up. I personally think that India, and as the Prime Minister has himself stated today, that BRICS is very important to India. India should go ahead with BRICS. India should be confident and allow BRICS the political momentum that it needs, the political flexibility that it requires. And even with the contradiction, like I pointed out, that we support Armenia and Azerbaijan is a part of BRICS, we should allow the envelope to extend. At the minute, India is in a sweet spot. That spot may not, last for very long. But so far as it does, I think BRICS is the way forward for India to signal not only to the Anglo-Saxon world that we have options, but in the real world, you can overcome a lot of things just by communicating, just by being. That is what diplomacy means. BRICS in the world of war, where there is war with Ukraine, where there is war in, Israel, where there is war in Sudan, BRICS is a rare diplomatic push. It also tells us how important the United Nations is. It bypasses international institutions and provides a new flexible architecture. So to my mind, India is doing the very right thing, by being another brick in the wall.
Okay, Gautam Mukherjee, your perspective on the same as well. I'd like to give you the last word. As far as the binaries are concerned, like you also pointed out, that those no longer exist. India no longer has to either support the United States of America or Russia, and we've made that plenty clear to both the countries. Especially in the recent, past 2 years, India has made its position very clear when we said that we will continue to buy oil from Russia if it's cheaper for our people. We will put our nation's interests first. We do not want to get into a war that was started in a way by the United States of America pushing for Ukraine to become a part of the NATO alliance. But keeping that in mind, I want to understand from your perspective, how does then BRICS grow to define itself and deal with some of the contradictions that I've pointed out of India and China being on this forum together, and then also inviting member states such as Iran, which continues to be a pariah as far as the international community is concerned?
Well, the key reason why India is growing at 7% is because of our domestic economy. Our exports are a fraction of international exports. I think they don't even amount to 2% all told. So it isn't our, these trade deficits and so on that we are running. It's because we do not have enough exportable goods. And we're working on it. We're trying to get some of the value chain transferred to India. Our own manufacturing proportion of the GDP is about 12 to 15%, which is about the same as our agriculture, which is also highly inefficient. And we want to get manufacturing index up to 25% of the GDP. But we've been talking about that for a long time. It is easier said than done. So organizations such as BRICS, SCO, G20. G20 has wonderful prospects from the continent of Africa, particularly after it became G21 and India championed that cause. That's 50 countries, African Union. They are interacting more and more with us, and it could land up very, very lucrative, both in bilateral terms and in terms of exports to such many of the countries. BRICS is a club that we need to belong to. It is a way to also SCO, BRICS, ASEAN. These are all places we need to go to, but our attractiveness is more for the others to access the Indian domestic market, and our success in terms of exports and in terms of international cooperation to improve our economy is as yet a work in progress.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.